Operation Magic Carpet, the greatest homecoming in history. The war was over, but for over 8 million American troops, the real battle had just begun, the fight to get home. Victory celebrations erupted across the world, from Times Square to London. But in distant war zones, millions of soldiers were still stranded. Scattered across Europe, the Pacific, and Asia, they waited in overcrowded camps, growing restless as months passed with no sign of a way home. Disease spread, supplies dwindled, and frustration boiled over. Riots broke out in some camps as soldiers demanded answers. The U.S. military had to act fast. Inside a dimly lit war room, top military leaders gathered around a massive map. Red markers covered the globe, each one representing thousands of troops who needed transport. Generals barked orders, telegraphs buzzed with urgent messages, and strategists scrambled to coordinate the largest troop movement in history. The mission was clear. Operation Magic Carpet had begun. But before they could get home, some soldiers had to fight their way to safety. In the Pacific, deep in the jungles of Japanese-occupied islands, scattered enemy forces refused to surrender. American troops still faced ambushes, deadly booby traps, and brutal hand-to-hand combat. In the suffocating heat, soldiers advanced cautiously, rifles raised, eyes scanning the dense foliage. Then, gunfire erupted. Grenades exploded. Chaos engulfed the battlefield as desperate, last resistance Japanese fighters attacked. For many, survival was still uncertain. Every step forward meant another battle, another ambush, another friend lost. Some units had to call in last-minute airstrikes, watching as fighter planes roared overhead, unleashing a storm of fire to clear their way home. In Europe, a different battle was unfolding. Thousands of American troops found themselves trapped in Soviet-controlled territories. The war with Germany was over, but tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union had already begun to rise. Soviet forces stalled American evacuations, refusing to let the troops leave. At a tense border checkpoint, U.S. and Soviet officers stood face to face, their hands hovering over their holsters. Just one wrong move could reignite the conflict. Behind closed doors, American diplomats fought to negotiate their way out. When diplomacy failed, the military turned to covert operations. Under the cover of darkness, U.S. pilots executed dangerous airlifts, sneaking soldiers out before Soviet forces could stop them. Inside the cockpit of a C-47 transport plane, dials flickered as alarms blared. A pilot gripped the controls, his fuel running low, engines pushed to their limits. On the ground, searchlights swept across the runway, seconds away from exposing the escape. But just as enemy forces closed in, the aircraft roared into the sky, carrying its cargo of exhausted, battle-worn soldiers to freedom. For those traveling by sea, the journey home was just as perilous. Thousands of soldiers crammed onto repurposed warships, meant for combat, not comfort. Hammocks hung in every available space. Men slept on the open decks, and food rations ran low. As the ships crossed the Pacific and Atlantic, brutal storms threatened to sink them. Towering waves crashed against the steel hulls, sending men sliding across slick decks. Below, the air was thick with sickness, the sounds of soldiers groaning in the darkness. But despite the misery, they held on. Every passing mile brought them closer to home. Some ships carried prisoners of war, rescued from brutal Japanese and German camps. Many were too weak to stand, their bodies ravaged by starvation and disease. Medics worked tirelessly, performing emergency surgeries and rationing medical supplies. On one ship, a soldier, barely conscious, clutched a tattered photograph of his family. A nurse whispered, "Hold on, you're almost there, but someone make it." The sea became a final resting place for those who had survived years of war, only to succumb in their final days before home. Meanwhile, logistical challenges overwhelmed the military. Ships were scarce, air transport was limited, and delays frustrated the troops. Some waited for months in remote locations with little news. Morale dropped, fights broke out, and despair set in. To speed up the process, the military repurposed bombers to carry soldiers, stripped down warships to maximize capacity, and even enlisted commercial ocean liners to join the mission. The entire U.S. transportation network was mobilized to bring the troops home. In the Arctic, thousands of troops stationed in Greenland and Iceland faced a brutal winter as they awaited their return. Ice locked in some ships, forcing emergency rescues. In the South Pacific, soldiers stationed on remote islands struggled with dwindling supplies as they awaited evacuation. Some resorted to makeshift rafts, desperate to reach larger islands where they had a better chance of being rescued. Every corner of the world had stranded troops, and every day mattered. Then, at last, the horizon changed. New York Harbor, San Francisco, Norfolk. As the first ships arrived, thousands gathered at the docks, waving banners and flags. Soldiers scanned the crowds, searching for the families they hadn't seen in years. A mother's eyes filled with tears as she spotted her son stepping off the gangplank. A soldier dropped his bag as his child ran into his arms. The cheers of the crowds mixed with the echoing blasts of ship horns. America was welcoming its heroes home. Some returned to a hero's welcome, with parades and celebrations. Others, stepping off the ship in the dead of night, found themselves alone, unsure of what awaited them. But not all homecomings were joyful. For some, the scars of war ran deep. Veterans returned to a country that had moved on without them. Some found their jobs gone, their homes lost. Others struggled with the memories of battle, waking up in the night to the sounds of phantom gunfire. The war had ended, but for many, a new struggle had just begun. Post-traumatic stress, known then as battle fatigue, left many veterans feeling lost, misunderstood, and abandoned by the country they fought for. Some turned to alcohol, others withdrew from their families, and some, unable to escape the nightmares, were lost to suicide. Operation Magic Carpet officially lasted until 1946, but its impact lasted a lifetime. For months, they had fought. For years, they had dreamed. And now, at long last, they were home. Operation Magic Carpet wasn't just about transportation. It was a promise that no matter where they fought, America would always bring them back. The ships, the planes, and the endless logistical efforts were more than just movement. They were a nation's commitment to its warriors. If you found this story incredible, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with history lovers. Let's honor the sacrifices of these heroes by keeping their stories alive. What historical event should we cover next? Let us know in the comments.
Nhắm luôn.